Do you have a paranormal encounter you'd like to share with us? Send us an email with your story for a chance of it being featured on Weird World. Some people are unlucky enough to come across a sinister entity, the threat and memories of which can haunt their mind for years. The following true accounts of such encounters convey the desperate dislocation caused by the Sheehan family's domestic ghost, the 25 years of frightening manifestations experienced by Yeva, and the dark foreboding contained in Hannah's chance sighting of a mysterious presence. A haunted legacy. In the early 1980s, Julia and Ross Sheehan moved into a council house in Nottingham, England. The young couple had an infant son and had been looking for an affordable home in the area where they were eager to settle down. When they first viewed the property, they noticed that the door to the basement had been mysteriously bricked up, unlike the other houses on the street. They thought this was odd, but decided it wasn't a major concern. The first few years of living in the house were relatively uneventful. Ross worked as an electrical engineer, while Julia took care of their growing family, which now included 2 more sons. However, after about 3 years, a neighbour who frequently visited warned Julia that she sensed an evil presence in the house. She advised the pair to get the house blessed, something that they had never done when first moving in. Soon after this, strange and frightening events began to unfold. The oldest son, around 5 years old at the time, started having vivid nightmares of a gnarled, shadowy figure in his room at night. He described the presence as a tall, skinny black woman with long, bony fingers and wild hair. The nightly encounters terrified him so much he refused to sleep alone anymore. Before long, all 3 brothers crammed into one bedroom at night for comfort. In addition to the sinister sightings, the family began hearing unexplained, raspy, scratching noises on the windows and knocks in the corners of rooms. The sounds were impossible to pinpoint, but lasted for several minutes at a time. Putrid odours would also waft through the home and then suddenly disappear just as quickly. Dog paw prints mysteriously materialised on the kitchen floor, despite no pets living there. The Sheehan's middle son seemed curiously drawn to the presence, often playing by himself and interacting with an invisible entity when his brothers weren't around. But the dark spirit increasingly targeted the other family members. One night, after Ross had scolded the boys for misbehaving, he had a vivid nightmare of being chased and brutally bitten by a ferocious demonic dog. When he awoke, there were actual bite marks on his chest. Another evening, Julia felt an invisible force jump on the bed, then violently shake it before leaping back to the windowsill. Julia would frantically recite prayers until the episode ended. Maniacal cackling was also heard, echoing around the house at night. On one occasion, the couple asked a sceptical uncle to house-sit while they took the kids out for the day. When they returned home that evening, they found the front door flung open and all the lights turned on. The terrified uncle admitted to challenging the presence, only to be violently thrown across the room by an unseen force. He had fled the house after hearing mocking laughter. Now desperate, the family contacted the city council about the escalating supernatural events. An official came to inspect the property, but shortly after had to be hospitalised due to a mysterious illness. She refused to step foot in the house again. All subsequent meetings took place at a pub down the street. Eventually, the council found the beleaguered family a new home on a different street nearby. But on moving day, the middle son was curiously upset and didn't want to leave. After the family moved out, they learned that countless tenants had quickly abandoned the property over the years, unable to withstand the evil inhabiting it for so long. Locals later informed the Sheehans that years ago A black woman had tragically taken her own life in the house alongside her dog. The basement where she had been found suspended was the one with the bricked-up doorway. After the family's experiences, the house was converted into a Chinese takeaway shop, but the dark spirit is said to still reside there, continuing to terrorise all who enter inside its walls. The Nighttime Visitor. In the late 1970s, a couple named Victor and Mila Koval lived with their infant daughter in a small one-roomed apartment in Ukraine. At only a year old, the little girl named Yeva had her first supernatural encounter there one evening, though the memory of the incident wouldn't fully resurface until decades later. The family all slept together in the main room, with the parents on the floor and the toddler on a small couch. The apartment had carpet covering all the floors and a long hallway from the front door to the kitchen. One night, young Yeva was gently shaken awake and opened her eyes to see an extremely pale woman dressed all in black leaning over her. She had stark white skin, long straight black hair, and a veil covering most of her gaunt face. The child felt no fear as the phantom woman gazed down at her silently for a minute before turning and walking away into the darkness. The rest of the details remained hazy. Years later, Yeva described the vague buried memory to her shocked mother, who confirmed that they had moved out of that apartment before she turned 2. Miller was astounded that her daughter could recall so much about the home and spectral visitor from such an impossibly young age. It was Yeva's first face-to-face encounter with the paranormal, although certainly not the last. When Yeva was 16, her religious father had moved the family to Israel, where they now lived. One night, she and 2 friends decided to hold a makeshift séance with a homemade Ouija board to try and communicate with spirits for fun. The 3 teens sat in a bedroom with the board, which was printed out on paper and had a ring placed on top as a planchette. One friend eagerly tried summoning various famous deceased celebrities and historical figures, but had no luck reaching anyone. That was when the idea dawned on Yeva. Why not try to conjure the ghostly woman who had visited her as a toddler? The pale spectre's image was still crisp in her mind. As the 2 girls placed their fingers on the ring and concentrated intensely on the description of the phantom, the planchette suddenly began sliding deliberately around the board. Convinced her friend was manipulating it as a prank, Yeva convinced the 3rd skeptical pal to help restrain the makeshift planchette. But even with all their strength, the ring moved effortlessly under their fingers as though guided by an unseen force. The board revealed the entity's name was some variation of a Bella or a Vela. She claimed to be the spirit of a young woman who had been cruelly slain at the age of 26, and she even provided a vague section number of her burial plot. Despite trying to carefully document the details, the girls would later struggle to recall the exact spellings and information. The shocking experience left the teens shaken and displeased the adults when word spread about the sneaky séance. But it did spark an insatiable curiosity in the supernatural for Yeva that would follow her into adulthood. Flash forward to when the young woman was 26 herself, the same age as her alleged spirit contact from childhood. She had relocated to the United States by this time and was battling her ex-boyfriend over custody of their young daughter. Out late drinking one night to relieve the stress, she decided to get an early start on finding a lawyer the next morning for the impending legal fight. Sitting parked outside the bar at around 11 p.m, she dialed a law firm but was met by a strange raspy voice instead of the receptionist. An angry entity shouted violently at her in an unrecognisable, ancient-sounding language. After hanging up, Yeva immediately sensed that the being she had contacted was not of this world, but rather something evil trying to push her over the edge. However, she refused to let the bizarre occurrence unravel her. Yeva called back several more times with hopes of confronting whatever had answered, but only reached a normal voicemail message. As frightened as the episode left her, she also felt strangely empowered. The ordeal gave her strength to pick herself up and keep fighting through the turmoil, confident she could overcome these manifestations through her faith. In the end, she retained custody of her daughter without issue. Yeva emerged from the court battle and the supernatural attack profoundly changed. No longer afraid of the darkness, she found solace in studying all things paranormal, a passion that liberated her from the last remnants of fear. The Black Dog of Barton. One winter night around 2 a.m. in the early 2010s, a woman named Hannah Blake was driving to the Manchester airport in England for an overnight work shift. There was intermittent construction on the motorway, forcing her onto a detour down rural roads in the area. She took the exit near Worsley Village and continued parallel to the M602 motorway heading south. The streets winding along the Manchester Ship Canal were deserted and eerily quiet compared to normal conditions. Not a soul was out walking at this late hour. As Hannah approached the old Barton swing bridge, an unexplainable sense of dread washed over her. She broke out in a cold sweat despite the heat blasting in her car. Apprehensive about crossing the antiquated old bridge, which was shrouded in mist, she forced herself to slowly drive forward. The bridge creaked and groaned under the weight of her vehicle. Around the sweeping bend, just past the bridge, sat an old monastery. Peering through the gates, the woman spotted the outline of a massive black dog about to cross the road ahead. She slowed down to allow it to pass, but as her headlights illuminated the creature, she gasped. There was nothing there to reflect the light. No discernible figure, just a vague, barely visible shadow where the animal should have been. Its eyes glowed fierce yellow as it turned to look at her. They were not the shining eyes of an animal, but emitted a unique kind of radiance. The shadowy form then bounded across the road in an unnatural, jerky motion difficult to describe. It seemed to materialise and then disappear once out of her headlights' view. Utterly confused and rattled by what she had just witnessed, Hannah scanned all around but saw no trace of where the phantom dog could have gone. As she continued driving past the monastery, the radio abruptly clicked on, startling her. The overwhelming sense of foreboding had also strangely lifted. A nagging voice in her head offered some comfort. You weren't meant to see that, it wasn't for you. But the perplexing sighting of that bizarre apparition would stay seared in Hannah's mind for years to come.